Good morning. Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're drawing to the close of our study, which I've entitled Kings and Emperors, and we're beyond the pages of the New Testament, but we want to talk about two people who factor enormously in the history of the New Testament church, and for good and for bad. And also some other emperors along the way. But let me start off by saying I was right the first time. It was Titus. Of course it is. Why do I second guess myself in the middle of these things? I don't know. Anyway, you want to talk about Hadrian and the Rescript that he issued in 122 AD and the way it provided Christians with a level of protection. When we were together last time, when we talked about Nero, we talked about the burning of Rome being this watershed moment where Christians became enemy of the state. If you were not practicing a protected ancient religion, you were expected to be a participant in the civil religion of Rome, which Christians would not do. And if you practice a religion that was not legalized, that itself was a capital offense. Now, this was not aggressively pursued. People were basically left alone. But it allowed the empire, if it saw a certain movement, religious movement, as a threat, then to use that law to eradicate that threat. And Christianity came to be perceived as that kind of threat. Now, we tend to think of the persecution of Christians as something that was uniform and in its scope and in its intensity from the AD 60s all the way to the year 313 and the Edict of Milan, where Constantine legalized Christianity. But that would not be the case. In the early days, the persecution of Christians was anything but uniform, and Christianity continued to grow. It was more intense in places like Rome or the province of Asia, less intense in North Africa, or uh, what we think of as Syria and those areas where Christianity became very strong. In present day, the eastern part of present day Turkey, where the church is very strong and growing and avoiding a lot of this. So it varied from place to place. In 122, 120, 121, 122, the Emperor Hadrian, who was not a very good man and not really a very good emperor, not like Antoninus Pius and not like Marcus Aurelius, but in 122, he came across a Christian man that influenced him to think twice about Christians, and I have again forgotten his name. But anyway, Quadratus, and it caused him with letters and other things because Christians were always writing letters to rulers, and maybe we should do a series on that, like the letter to Pliny but Christians were always writing letters saying, listen, we pay our taxes. We obey the law. There's no reason why we should be persecuted. So he issued an executive order known as Hadrian's Rescript, in which he said he didn't legalize Christianity, but he said if Christians are not breaking the law otherwise, don't bring the charge of Christianity before the courts. If, however, they've been caught committing another crime, and especially if their Christianity factors into that crime, then absolutely bring the capital charge against them and execute punishment. He also said in his Rescript, if there are frivolous or malicious accusations of Christianity against law-abiding people who are otherwise law-abiding, then those who are bringing the charge, the judge has the discretion. People who are bringing the charge, then they are punished for clogging the courts because of their own vendettas. They just are. It also said all a person had to do to escape the charge of Christianity was to recount. Just verbally say before the court, I'm not a Christian. That's all they had to do. Of course, most Christians would not do that, but it provided a level of protection for Christians for more than 100 years. It was issued in 122, and it was not voided until 257. No, excuse me, 249, when Decius, who was a terrible ruler and losing power, when Decius blamed the Christians for all the bad things that were happening. We have forsaken the old gods. These Christians are bringing all this pestilence upon us. And so between 249 and 250, Decius began the great persecution against Christians, in which he was trying to stamp out Christianity. Mostly what he did was to seize leaders in the church in all cities and provinces and to seize church property. It wasn't an attempt to exterminate all Christians. When he lost power and Valerian came to be emperor in 257, he stopped all the persecution against Christians, but he never really had a good hold on power, and nothing unites a people like a common enemy. So in 259, he starts persecuting Christians again. But the real threat, the existential threat to Christianity, came in 303 with Diocletian. When Diocletian came to power in 284, he stopped persecuting Christians. But by 303, when he was starting to lose power again, he tried to exterminate all Christians. It wasn't just a matter of jailing leaders, executing a few, seizing property. It was anyone who's a Christian must die. And that was a great threat to the church. Many Christians at the time recounted. And then in 20 years, whenever Christianity was legalized, wanted to come back to the fold, and a lot of church leaders didn't want to welcome them back. But anyway, that was the existential threat that ended with Constantine and the Edict of Milan, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow, or next time, I should say. But I want us to know about Hadrian's Rescript, which was a Roman executive order. It was law, and it was in effect from AD 122 to AD 249. So more than 100 years. There was a law on the books that said Christians can only be prosecuted for other crimes first, and then they can be charged with being Christians. And if someone brings a frivolous accusation, that person should be punished. And the only thing a Christian had to do to avoid the capital punishment associated with being a Christian was to publicly recant before the court. That's all they had to do. They didn't have to prove anything once they went back home. They just had to say, no, I'm not a Christian, or I reject Christianity. And it provided a level of protection for more than 100 years that allowed the church then to grow. And grow it did, so that by the time Valerian was persecuting Christians, clearly by the time Diocletian is persecuting Christians, Christians may have made up 40+% of the Roman Empire in terms of the population of the Roman Empire. And so in other words, Diocletian's not going to accomplish his goal. Anyway, we'll talk about Christianity finally being legalized and what a terrible thing that was for the church next time as we conclude our study, which is entitled Kings and Emperors. Thank you for joining me.